Welcome to Everlutionary, a podcast about how we can restore balance and heal the world. Every episode of my show, we explore the future of humanity and how we've gotten to where we are today. Through inspirational stories about healing, science, and mysticism, we'll see how we can reshape our society to create a world free of violence. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. Welcome to another episode of Everlutionary, restoring balance and healing the world. Today, we explore the transformative power of community and connection with a truly visionary leader, Radha Agrawal. Imagine a world where every morning begins with dance, where every interaction is steeped in joy, and where every individual feels a profound sense of belonging. This isn't just a dream. It's a reality that Radha has been creating as co-founder and CEO of Daybreaker, a global community spanning 34 cities, appearing in all 7 continents, and engaging over 800,000 people in an early morning alcohol and drug-free celebration. Radha is also a social entrepreneur, community architect, and author of the best-selling book, Belong, which offers tools and insights on building meaningful communities in our often disconnected world. She was named by MTV as one of 8 women who will change the world, and has won numerous entrepreneurship awards and accolades on disruptive innovation. Radha has woven her passion for community and creativity into every strand of her career. So as we settle into this conversation, let's embrace the opportunity to learn, grow, and be inspired by Radha's journey and insights, exploring how we too can contribute to a world where everyone feels they truly belong. Welcome. I'm so happy that you've joined today as my very first guest on Everlutionary, my brand new podcast. How are you doing?
So good to be number one. So good, Howard. Thanks for having me.
You are. I even delayed the launch because I was thinking about all the people in my life and just kind of like what this podcast means to me, but also what I hope it'll mean to the world one day. And I'm like, Radha really is the epitome of, I feel like, the work that has to happen in the world. And you live it, you watch it, you walk it, and you manifest it. And so I have to just let you know how much I admire your work.
You're so sweet. Thank you for saying that.
How's your heart? Let's start right there. How's your heart? How are you feeling? Let's just tap in right now. Like, where's your breath moving? What's alive for you?
Yeah, I think my heart is feeling stretched in so many wild ways right now, relationally, from a lens of sort of looking at what's happening in the world. I feel like we are all being stretched right now. And I have a 5-year-old daughter who's starting to rebel against me. So I'm feeling stretched there as well, of just in so many ways, as a parent, as a mother, as a lover, as a friend, as a community leader, as a community member. And then also watching what's happening all around the world and the conflicts. So yeah, I'm feeling so many feelings right now.
Yeah. You are a mother. Outside of running the businesses that you run, you have the joy of raising a beautiful child. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how old she is?
Yeah, her name is Soleil. She's 5 years old. She's in Montessori, so independent learning. She has traveled with me all around the world for the last 5 years, probably been to like 100 cities and countries with me already at 5 years old, and has been to every continent except Australia. So I'm excited to see what her eyes have seen will impact this little girl.
Wow. Similarly, not as many countries and cities, but I did a lot of traveling back and forth to India when I was a kid. Spent a lot of summers there through childhood and high school. And I think those are some of the most impactful experiences in my life. And I can only imagine at 5 years old, she's absorbing kinetically all the joy that radiates from around the world.
We're going to the Arctic. We're taking 150 people to the Arctic in 3 weeks. And she's coming with us. And she went to Antarctica with us. And I mean, top and bottom of the planet, so it's really, really cool to show her that part of the world through my work.
Through your work. And your work has changed drastically, right? So you started your career as an investment banker on Wall Street. You've recently published a book called Belong, which is an incredible book that we're going to be talking about in the podcast. But at the age of 30, you wrote that you had a huge epiphany and it changed the trajectory of your entire life. Would you take a moment to talk to us about this moment and how your life has evolved and connected to this epiphany?
Yeah. So when I turned 30 years old, I realized I didn't belong. And I realized that I was sleepwalking through my 20s, kind of falling into friend groups and really not meeting the community that aligned with my values and my interests and what I cared about. And I think so often we put our professional careers and our romantic partnerships first over community and friendships. And that prioritization of romantic and professional career can often take us in these directions that don't really align with our sense of belonging. So it's really interesting that the American kind of rugged individualism or sort of toxic individualistic culture has taken to this space of, hey, look out for yourself first, get the perfect profession, get the perfect partner, and then you can kind of worry about community. So I think at 30 years old, I realized, wow, I don't belong. And it wasn't sort of low point that I'd hit. It was just this realization of like, just evaluating who I invited to my birthday, who was coming out that night. And I just wasn't feeling super excited about everyone coming, or there was this stickiness around, are these my people? Do they really align with who I am? And I remember just feeling really lonely and alone that day with my twin sister, of course. So it's interesting, my loneliness with my twin sister, who I shared a womb with. But that moment really, I think, changed my life. It was that moment where I was like, wow, where are my people at? What do I care about? What qualities am I looking for in a friend? And let's ask each other that. Have we ever spent the time auditing or asking ourselves, what qualities are we looking for in a friend? What quality do I not want in a friend? And then what quality do I need to embody in order to attract the friends of my dreams? And that sort of evaluation, my own life at 30 years old, I think changed my life.
Wow. And through that evaluation, there was this underlying feeling of loneliness, which brought you to this deep, profound realization that belonging is one of the most important things in our world. And could you take a moment and let us know, like for a lot of us, we hear the word a lot, loneliness. Oh, lonely this. And we're living these kind of isolated lives behind the guise of social media. What would you and how would you like define loneliness for us in your words? Like, what does it mean to be lonely?
Yeah. So loneliness is sort of a space, an emotional state where you feel disconnected and you feel out of belonging. 1 in 4 Americans have 0 friends to confide in. And this number has tripled in the last 30 years. And it turns out having poor social connections is as harmful to your physical health as being an alcoholic and twice as harmful as obesity. And so loneliness really, there's so many sort of pieces to what happens when you're feeling lonely. One, it's a physically debilitating feeling. It also reduces your lifespan by, an order of magnitude. It really sort of affects every aspect of our lives. And it actually turns out that every social issue we face as a human species ladders down to, I don't belong, therefore I will ... shoot up a school. I will shoot myself up with opioids. I will abuse alcohol. I will abuse food. I will abuse sort of money. I will abuse power. I will look for fame. Every sort of major social issue ladders down to, yeah, I feel lonely and therefore I will. And so I think it's more important now than ever to address this feeling of, where do I belong? Like, what is the energetics of happiness? And how can I really kind of reprioritize my life to focus more on friendship and connection first?
Wow. What a way for us as listeners to think about at the moment how so much of the violence and pain in the world can sometimes be connected to those of us that feel marginalized and feel like we don't have a place in the world. And because we're not sure where we fit in, and we're not sure where we belong, we end up living with deep anxiety and fear. And therefore, we may almost move to deep instincts of fighting for survival. Because the way I understand it from your book is that belonging is actually a critical part of our survival as a species. So, literally, fundamental to this work is understanding almost what you do so brilliantly in the book is you're reimagining Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, Radha is going in right now. She's not messing around.
Maslow wrote The Hierarchy of Needs in 1943, where a lot of research on belonging hadn't been done. Certainly, there was no technology at the time sort of to impact his hierarchy of needs. And so obviously a lot has changed in the last 100 years, right? 90 years since he's written and published his hierarchy of needs. And so all these studies, Harvard's 100-year study that published just a few years ago, showcased that belonging is a basic human need as important as food, water, and shelter. And so Maslow places belongingness in the third rung of this hierarchy of needs when in fact it should be placed in the first rung, again, as important as food, water, and shelter. So I just wanted to rewrite the hierarchy of needs to reflect actually the importance of community across every phase of the ascension of the hierarchy. And so I call it, my hierarchy of needs, the Agrawal hierarchy of needs.
And what's really beautiful and really, I want to name that Abraham Maslow also was a white man. And coming from a colonial perspective when developing a hierarchy of needs, and you are a woman of color that brings a very unique perspective, right? With Japanese heritage and Indian heritage, you are a multi-ethnic human that is a powerful woman that is channeling also what is a primal instinct, which to me is a part of what's often off in the world today, which is where the patriarchy and where men have so much influence over world affairs, over our political, economic, and social systems. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist that was working on this ladder of needs, but in some ways, the needs of men are slightly different than the needs of women. How do you feel about that?
Hawah, you're really touching on a subject that is so near and dear to me. I think that certainly in the 1940s, where there was very much a division between the male voice and the female voice, men maybe didn't fully understand that humans are created by humans, that babies, newborns truly cannot survive or thrive without touch, connection, the oxytocin from their mother, from their father. And so none of that was, of course, available for study in the 1940s. And so all of that is a very recent discovery. And so I think, again, there's all this rhetoric around the future is female, which I don't actually fully subscribe to. I really believe that the future is feminine. So the distinction is all men have the feminine inside of us, right? Men come from women. That's sort of the gene that shifts and you go from a woman to a man. And so the future is feminine in that if we look at the world through the lens of the feminine, which is 90 cents of every dollar earned by a woman goes back to her community versus 20 cents of every dollar that a man earns going back to their community. There's all this dialogue around, the patriarchy and the matriarchy. In fact, actually, I had a really vivid dream very recently, maybe just a few days ago, where in this dream, I saw an egg. It was this beautiful, large golden egg that was hatching. And inside this egg was this matriarchy rising. It was a vulva, actually. And what showed up for me, kind of how I interpreted the dream, is that in order to really birth the next, we really need to lean into the matriarchy and move from a culture of patriarchal, top-down, extractive, materialistic culture to a culture of sufficiency and a culture of right relationship to the planet and a culture of true belonging.
Wow. There's something that one of my college friends wrote in one of his songs 20 years ago, and I'll never forget this line in the song. In the chorus, he wrote, and sang, without femininity, a man cannot be born. Exactly what you're saying. And I've never heard that stat before about how much cents on a dollar men and women give back to their communities.
Particularly in developing countries. I actually need to look at the stat for developed countries, but certainly in developing countries, that is the math. So one of my projects, Thinks, that I co-founded with my twin sister Mickey and my dear friend Antonia, we invented sort of a pair of underwear that you could bleed into. And after learning that 100 million girls drop out of school in India and Africa because of their period, they call it their week of shame, and they fall so far behind in their studies because they miss 1 week of school every month, that they end up dropping out of school, making them unproductive members of society, which doesn't allow them to contribute to their communities. So this underwear that we invented to support women during the time of the month, that's washable, reusable, where for every pair you bought here, we funded the production of 7 washable, reusable cloth pads for women in India and Africa. That allowed for them to stay in school and allowed for them to stay productive members of society, which allowed them to contribute those 80 to 90 cents on the dollar to their communities. And that's where I learned that statistic.
Wow, that's incredible. And since we're already talking on the topic, let's dive deeper for a second. As a woman, you're often in spaces where you're the only woman in the boardroom, or you're the only woman that's leading these big team meetings. You're the CEO of Daybreaker and then multi other entities, including the new Belong Center, which is a new nonprofit organization that you just launched. As a woman that's out there leading and really bringing in these values of belonging, how are you reshaping these spaces? How are you bringing values that you often don't see in spaces that are kind of run by patriarchy and that are entrenched in this feeling of materialistic, capitalistic culture that we're referring to?
Yes. First of all, thank you for saying that. I think that in the world of events, in the world that I work in, kind of most of the experience design, I would say, for large scale events are run by men. Men produce the largest festivals in the world, men produce the largest concerts in the world. And so, what I've noticed is in the kind of experience design, how women hold a container, how women hold space, how women design. Certainly for me, when I think about designing our 3-hour Daybreaker experiences, I really think through the lens of what is the journey that we're taking our community members on, and how could we really open up their feminine so that they can really dance with reckless abandon and then be fed with messages at the end during our closing ceremony and our secret concert. And so, just in the way we design our experiences, our dance parties, when people come to our Daybreaker events, of course, they're in the morning, and Daybreaker is 75% women. Because of that, if you're a smart man, you'd come to Daybreaker. But the idea of sort of a female run large scale event, sort of company or community, I haven't seen that many of. And so it's been really beautiful to influence other male producers and other male organizers of large scale festivals and communities on how to really design kind of feminine containers that still have all the high octane elements, but that really sort of think about the dose, which is a term that I share about in my book, which is kind of an acronym that I coined for your 4 happy neurochemicals: your dopamine, your oxytocin, your serotonin, and your endorphins. And for me as an experienced designer, to think through the lens of the way our brain functions and to reverse engineer our events to actually release these 4 happy neurochemicals, I haven't really heard very many male organizers doing that. So that's the kind of thing I love teaching and sharing with them. And of course, I learn a lot from them too. And I just think that there's a place for everyone, certainly for men moving speakers. I'm just kidding.
I love it. No, I'll always lift the speaker for you anytime.
I'm teasing. No, I think there's a lot that we can learn as well from both sides. I think it's been really cool to see just how our community across the world, all 800,000 of our community members, have been moved by kind of a feminine container.
I really appreciate you saying that, Radha. And, part of the theme of my podcast is restoring balance. And when you say that, it really tugs at my heartstrings, because I do feel that it's important to honor all of those perspectives, right? I think the issue in the world, And the difficulty and the obstacle we face right now is we've overwhelmingly leaned too far in one direction.
That's right. Everything is so binary.
Exactly. And because of that, we've created this kind of like, if there was a scale, it's really just tipped so far over that we're kind of falling over the cliff because we have not found a balance between the feminine and the masculine and even the space in between, the non-binary, right? And so I think when we can start to lean into honoring the masculine does have an important role to play in the world, just as the feminine does. And if we can equally support both of those forces of energy, as well as the forces in between and unseen, then we'll find ourselves moving in a way that allows us to tap into a deeper potential. But we were losing our potentiality because we have been stuck so far into one binary.
That's right. And I just feel like, yeah, the polarity between the masculine and the feminine, that's actually where the magic exists. And I think because of the patriarchy or because we have been so led by one certain sex, and of course, now, obviously, the tides are changing. This is the first time in history that more women are being invested in, more women are graduating college, more women are starting companies over men every year, more women are living longer than men. So that there's a lot that's sort of pushing the female experience forward for the first time. And of course, we stand on the shoulders of all the women who came before us. And I know that I kind of sit at the cusp of having been not a victim, but an educator for the masculine investor, for the type of kind of female-inspired company to invest in, like Thinks, our underwear company, which is very, very hard to find investors to understand an underwear company that you believe in. So we got a lot of no's. And so I think now the male investors are beginning to really open up their eyes and wake up to all of the products and services that women need, i.e., tampons and pads were invented by men. And it was supposed to support women, you know? And so that's why it's so uncomfortable and so toxic for the female body. And so it's time for us to invent for ourselves and our sex, you know? So that kind of thing.
I love you called that. I've got a friend, Ava, who lives in Oaxaca, Mexico, and she's actually developing a line of women, female created tampons that are like actually like from the woman's design perspective, which I never even heard that before, that they were initially developed by men. Like that's crazy. That's wild. Like how many things we have to unravel and deconstruct and how many ways we can start to reinvent ourselves. I love that you named all of the success. I think we live in a time where it does feel really hopeless. I think the grief, the collective sense of loss, and in some ways, hopelessness. I think hopelessness and belonging are interesting together as like words that I think when we feel like we belong, we feel hope. And when we don't feel like we belong, we don't feel hope.
Right. 90% of depression and anxiety cases come from loneliness. And yet, because big pharma companies can't sell you anything for loneliness, that's really sort of only solved by human to human interaction, but they can sell you antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds. And so that's been the big push from obviously media, is just let's talk about depression and anxiety. But what's underneath depression and anxiety is what? Is loneliness. So if we can solve for loneliness, we solve for depression and anxiety, and yet that will then decimate a lot of the revenue streams for big pharma. So that's why it's not being talked about or highlighted. Fortunately, Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy is talking about it, which I really appreciate and love. And of course, there's so many organizations now coming out and talking about loneliness as a really important pandemic, probably the most important pandemic to solve. And also the reason why we launched our nonprofit Belong Center to end loneliness and build a culture of belonging for people on the planet.
Absolutely. So big pharma does perhaps have invested interest in not solving the problem because instead of solving the root of the problem, they can continue to sell drugs that help us with our depression, our sadness, our sense of social isolation and loneliness. What are the ways that we do it that are addressing the root cause? And you're doing it through your organizing, but explain to us what are the ways that you see to solve the root of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, at first, I feel like we have to understand what our values are. I think as humans, we tend to kind of become friends with the person who sits next to us in the cubicle, or whose locker is next to us, or a person we just bumped into at the gym, and then wonder a few years later, why do I feel so lonely? Why do I feel so disenfranchised? Because we didn't take the time to sit down and actually evaluate our friendships in the same way that we evaluate our romantic partnerships and our professional careers. We just sort of end up falling into these friend groups that don't really align with our values. So I think step one is, what do I care about? What are the qualities that I'm looking for in a friend? Like I said earlier in this podcast, like what are the things that I value today? What are my interests? Like, have I sat down and asked myself, like, what do I care about? Oh, I love music and dance. I love environmental activism. I love community building. I love parenting. What are all the things that I love? And from this place, can I find community that align with these values? And I just think that we haven't taken the time or intentionality to really pinpoint what are the things that we love and care about, and how can I align with the communities that support those things. So I think that's the first place I would start. And actually, my book Belong, I have 25 exercises in the book that will take you through an entire journey of where you came from, where you lived, how many times did you move, what was your background life, how did you relate when you were a child, like what was your high school experience like. All of these questions, all the way that you've been raised as a child, will deeply influence how you socialize as an adult. And so, for example, I was interviewing someone for my book, and she shared that she's someone who waits for an invite rather than sends an invite, because when she was a kid, she invited a few friends over and they all said they would come. And then the last minute, they all canceled. And so she was at home by herself, feeling deeply rejected and very sad. And then her friends didn't really talk about it. She was too ashamed or didn't have the tools to talk about why they didn't come or how that made her feel. So from that day forward, she just never organized, never gathered anyone over, because it sort of connected to this moment of trauma for her. And so instead, she started labeling herself as introverted, or labeling herself as socially anxious. And all these things came from this sort of unsupported, unintegrated childhood trauma. And so if you talk to psychologists and psychiatrists, a lot of our sense of introversion or social anxiety come from untreated or unsupported, unintegrated traumas from our childhood. And so it's so important that we first understand, why do we feel shy? Why do we feel anxious in social settings? Like, were our parents fighting? Did we retreat to our bedrooms to find peace and solace on our own? And therefore, in social or community settings, we feel most safe on our own rather than in these kind of dynamic experiences where people are maybe arguing or making you feel unsafe. And so, really also understanding where we're from, what our experiences are, will then remind us, oh, that's the moment. But wait a minute, I came from a womb. I came from another person. It is my birthright to be in connection. It is my birthright to belong. It is my birthright to relate to one another. It is actually how we survive and thrive. So it's so deeply important for us to come home to that biological need and psychological need to connect with one another, that I think that we often forget why and how we got to where we are in that loneliness labeling.
Absolutely. And I'm even sensing, from what I'm hearing and noticing when even just talk to a lot of friends, that there's a lot of self-diagnosing happening today around our loneliness, our depression. We're starting to create a self-fulfilling prophecy around our own sadness. And then we begin to actually further create a story. We end up feeding a story, a narrative in our head, that if this one thing happens, I am always anxious, or I have social anxiety. And then we start telling ourselves, I have social anxiety. I have social anxiety. And the more we say that to ourselves, the more we begin to cement a story in our minds that I have social anxiety, or I am constantly sad. I am constantly depressed. And for sure, depression is a real clinical diagnosis, and people that are suffering from depression, it needs to be addressed. And at the same time, there is a nuance space here too of knowing and understanding that we can sometimes create stories in our heads about who we are, which we then begin to live up to. And we need to kind of learn how to back out of so that we can create a new story.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many pieces of that that we should unpack. But the first is that I think that we spend so much time labeling ourselves, Myers-Briggs test, anxious or not anxious, social or antisocial, or what are we? We're constantly sort of self-judging and self-diagnosing. Human design, astrology sign, the moon, all of this contributes to these sort of self-labelings, right?
Yeah, you're speaking my language.
Yeah, it's like, let's break all the labels. Let's remove all the labels and allow the entire human experience to show up for us. Like in my book, I write about we are all these things, not just one. And I have an illustration that I drew in my book of the kind of an outline of a human body. And on the arm, it says quiet and introspective. On the other arm, it says social butterfly. On the chest, it says bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. On the belly, it says sort of like cocooning. So like we let us allow ourselves to be social on one day and shy or antisocial or needing quiet time on another day. Like let's allow for the entire human experience to be there for us. And yes, of course, labeling human design, I love knowing that I'm an Aquarius.
Oh, I'm an Aquarius too. We got the link. I see now. I see you. I see you.
Exactly. You see, like there are areas where I'm like, man, when I read my astrology sign, I'm like, gosh, I'm a cliche of an Aquarius person. But when's your
But when's
birthday?
your birthday? Wow. January 30th.
January 26th. Okay.
Oh,
I
okay.
love it.
Okay, I got it. We're both community organizers. I've been organizing.
Yeah, it's the age of the Aquarius for the next 100 years. But I think labeling is the first thing that I would say. Let's break all the labels. Let's see which ones align with us really, and which ones are ones that feel like a self-soothing blanket that we need to courageously kind of move through or just take off of our bodies. Community and connection require courage, require the sort of putting on your shoes and getting outside and not just retreating to Netflixing and chilling and socialize on your phone. It requires courage. So the first thing is breaking all the labels. The second thing is courageous exploration.
First of all, the nuance of the labeling is so crucial. I think there's a lot of space for astrology, for example, and human design. I think it can be fun. I also think if one is not careful and using discernment, it can actually be dangerous. I think that it can become a piece that we can become so attached to. We can grasp so much to someone else's projection on us about how we're supposed to act or how we're supposed to react in certain situations or our personality type that we lose the self-determination and the ability to write our own destiny and to create our own personality and to know that we can constantly reinvent ourselves, constantly be reborn moment to moment. And so it's fun. Like we connected. It was like, yeah, you're an Aquarius. I'm an Aquarius. I see you. Like, that's great. And I would also say, like, just know that you are expansive and limitless at the same time. And that just because your chart or your human design or your animal, your Chinese animal might say one thing about you, doesn't mean that's all of you. And allow yourself to be liberated and free from any other people's stories about you, because you can write your own story. That's what I'm all about.
That's right. I mean, scientists, doctors, researchers, they say that you literally grow new organs, new skin, like your entire body sort of sheds and new cells emerge every 7 years. And so a version of yourself that was the way you were 7 years ago may not be the way you are now. You might have been a violent communicator 7 years ago, and now you're a more conscious communicator today. And to allow yourself to progress into new versions of yourself that might feel aspirational 7 years ago, but is now who you are today. And I think as long as we continue growing and as long as we continue self-reflecting, I think that is actually the key. What did Einstein say? It's like, the key to longevity and a life well lived is staying curious. And that starts with curiosity with ourselves, curiosity with, am I just staying stagnant to this one label about myself? Or can I move these waters, right? The saying, stagnant waters breed disease, and moving waters continue the flow. So to allow the flow of how we see ourselves to continue evolving to more aspirational places.
Yeah, don't get stuck, people. Keep letting that energy flow. Don't get stuck. And if you're feeling stuck, go and move. Go to a Daybreaker early in the morning and start dancing. Do some practice, some Tai Chi, some yoga. Let it metabolize through movement somatically. For me in my own personal life, that's been how I've processed so much of my own intergenerational trauma and some of my own ways to relate to grief and loss. It's learning how to shake my body and move my body. This has been really crucial for my own personal health and wellness. And I invite people that are tapped in to think about how you can be more connected into community, like we're talking about. Rather, you're a community builder. You're building community all around the planet. And building community is not easy. For those of us that have tried to bring groups of friends together, that have tried to bring people across differences together to connect, there always seems to be some drama, some point of contention, some misunderstanding, some moment when somebody's deeply offended. It's hard to keep a ship together. It's hard to run an organization. It's hard to run events. People are sensitive, rightfully so. And how do you deal with in community building? How do you prevent? What do you do to help prevent? And then how do you personally respond to like those moments of turmoil, of drama, of times when people feel like they don't belong or they've been offended? How do you personally compass that?
That's probably the most challenging part of my job as a community architect and someone who sticking my neck out to Pied Piper into the darkness sometimes. And so, yeah, there's another saying, the tall poppy gets cut down, the tallest poppy gets cut down. And so I felt that so many times where there's been sort of just hurt feelings in community when they don't feel invited to things, or a feeling of competitiveness with me for being at the front, or feeling of envy or jealousy, or a feeling of like wanting to criticize, and it really has been sort of my biggest growth edge to not take it personally, and to remember that in a sea of a million people, if there are 100, which is a lot, of disgruntled or unhappy or having their own backpack of emotions that they're carrying into our relationship, while it does still hurt and sting, because I am a thinking, feeling, sensitive being, I've learned to compost that and really feel more empathy for them and their experience. And or I take my distance, I take space, I take a breath, I go to my farm to take some rest and respite. I hug my daughter and then I get back on the horse. And I think the reason I keep getting back on the horse is I know that net, the positive impact that I'm having far, far outweighs the negative impact that I'm having. And I think that I have enough of a community now around me who encourage me, who cheerlead me, who I know to be with me for life in the endeavor of this work, which is the hardest work, honestly, gathering people, gathering their schedules, getting everyone aligned to meet, schlepping and lugging speakers and stage equipment and decor and food and beverage and finding venues and signage and every detail of the performance element, getting all the artists and DJs and horn sections and welcome committees and hugging committees and everyone in between. It's so much work for a $50 ticket. And so there are days where I do feel tired, but I would say most days I feel deeply energized. I feel deeply grateful that I get to do the work of bringing dance and joy and celebration alongside the sun.
Wow, so well said and so inspiring. I never heard that the tallest poppy is the first to get cut down. I've never heard that. It resonates so deeply. It's one of our greatest fears is putting ourselves out there, I think, and being willing to constantly do it again and again after you experience turmoil and after you experience even some trauma around what could happen when you are leading. As a leader, you are constantly under a microscope. And I know it's not easy to be in your shoes. And I just want to let you know I see you, but I know your heart. And I think that's really important today because in a world where it's really easy to dehumanize, it's really easy to reduce a human into someone without emotions and without feelings. And this is a pattern that has been causing so much pain and violence in our world. You write in your book about gossiping and I remember I was really struck by like some of your reflections on how destructive gossiping can be to ourselves individually, but also in the relationships in our community. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that right now, because I think it's important as we talk about community building. I actually see gossiping as something which ultimately we end up cutting our own feet out from under us. And for those of us that are interested in building an alternative world of compassion and kindness, where we're tired of all the heartache and the loss and the violence, we need to start seeing it within our own behavior when we are engaging in destroying or dehumanizing other people, even through gossiping, which I'd love for you to elaborate on if you would for a minute.
Yeah, there's a term called triangulation where, instead of someone going directly to you, they share and gossip with someone else and inevitably gets back to you. And then feelings are hurt and there's more stories created and there's more conflict and more hurt. So, the first thing I always say around gossiping is just go straight to the source. If you feel like you have some strife with someone, have the courage to pick up the phone, grab a coffee with them and sit with them and talk to them. Because if you gossip about someone else, inevitably someone will start gossiping about you. And I learned that the hard way myself, being just a human being living in the world of just, if I ever talked smack about somebody else, it always came back to them. It always came back to me. I would feel humiliated and embarrassed. And it only made the relationship suffer more and only made me mistrust that person more, which would often end up in either a rupture in the relationship or an end to the relationship. And so I really try to have a no gossip policy just in general. I do think that there's a difference between gossiping and processing. I think that gossiping is just to talk shit about someone and cut them down and make them, with bad intent. That's one piece of it. I think another part of community hygiene, I call it, is to really share someone who has bad intention with someone else and just say, hey, listen, be careful with this person because this has been my experience, and maybe don't go on a date with them because this is my experience, or maybe don't participate in a business endeavor because this is my experience. And so I do think that there is a difference between gossip, community hygiene, and offering just sort of your experience to someone or processing with a friend. Sometimes, because I have a large community, I will process with a friend who is also friends with someone with whom we have struggles with. And I will make sure to preface that conversation, hey, I love this person overall. I'm only sharing this with you because I want to figure out together how I can better relate or better repair with this person. Can you help me figure this out? So that's sort of how I like to come to a friend that has a mutual relationship with, let's say, someone with whom I'm struggling with, which, it rarely happens. But I did want to share that there's a difference between just bad intent gossiping to make yourself feel better because you've compared yourself, that person you're despairing, or someone's prettier than you, or someone's whatever it is, wealthier than you, or more successful in life, or made it, or there's so many reasons to cut someone down that I've experienced in my own life that has felt really shitty from a place of bad intent or insecurity, rather than from a place of wanting to process, to find more connection, to repair, to figure out what to do to learn how to, yeah, be in better connection with that person. So I think there are two ways to approach a conversation, but I really like to approach it through the lens of, hey, I'm feeling really hurt about this. What do you think? How can I approach this person to repair? And that's, I think, the better way to go.
Yeah. And I love how you brought in the difference between processing and gossiping, and specifically around protecting, right? And I think protecting is such an important part of,
Community hygiene.
yes, community hygiene. We have to want to protect each other and we have to want to protect the community. And to do that does require lots of processing and repairing and restoration of relationship. If we're not restoring relationship and intentionally attempting to create bridges when there are none, then we're only going to see more division and polarization. There is a moment here which allows us to take a look at how belonging and this sense of not belonging is connected to global conflicts. Whether we're talking about Haiti, the Congo, Israel and Palestine, the Ukraine, violence around the world is, in my opinion, in some ways connected deeply to this idea of belonging. And this is why you as a guest was so important to me, Radha. I know a lot of us are feeling the collective pain from what we're watching on TV and feeling helpless and hopeless in making a difference. The idea that we can somehow stop what is now just such a huge amount of suffering, just individually, is one that creates a lot of despair. I think a lot about individual liberation, but I've been thinking a lot about collective liberation as well. And I'm wondering, in your processing of what's been happening overseas, how are you creating a pathway for yourself to wake up and be able to dance and be able to find joy? And how can you help us maybe hold on to some hope, but also hold on to maybe an opportunity to reflect in an honest way about our own history as people and what we can do to make sure that we don't keep repeating these same mistakes of fighting fire with fire?
Yeah, I think first of all, succumbing to the fear and the suffering is actually playing exactly into the hands of everybody that's in these sort of button pushing positions. And so to me, the greatest rebellion is actually not war, but it's actually celebration. It's joy, it's dance, the technology, the healing technology of dance to bring the superorganism of thousands of people together to move in unison, to set this sort of new heart coherence, I think is actually extremely important. And so to me, that type of heart coherence is actually the most important, quote unquote, sort of healing rebellion that exists right now. So I really feel the call to spread more joy and more dance to even greater scale for that reason. I think that this conflict around the world has everything to do with the fact that there are not women and mothers in these strategic military positions. And there needs to be more women and mothers brought in to obviously make a decision on whether they're going to push a button to detonate a place that is filled with civilians, with mothers and children and humans, right? And so I just feel like right now it's a sea of men making these decisions while 50% of the world population is suffering from the result of it. Whether you're on whatever side of the aisle, as a woman, as a mother, you can't help but be devastated by what you're experiencing. And so that is actually my greatest call to arms is for women to lead the free world, for women to be in the highest military positions, for women to be the decision makers for whether to push any button at all, which obviously they would never because of the impact that it would have. So I think that dream that I had about the egg and the matriarchy, and that we are moving from a patriarchal world of materialism, again, and extraction and violence to a culture of sufficiency, right relationship to the planet, and sort of maternalistic view of kind of everybody winning, one team, one dream.
One team, one dream. And for those of us that are listening and feeling this in their hearts, and I speak to this from a really deep heart space, I know there's people that are finding it hard to dance. I know there's people that are finding it hard to find joy in these moments when we're flooded by these images of devastation and of civilians and just people everywhere. And how does someone who's feeling so distraught, feeling like they can't dance because it feels perhaps to them like dancing is not honoring in some way the people that are suffering, like, how do you respond to that? And I ask almost because I don't know, and I'm wondering.
I have an answer. I think kind of escapist, drug infused, alcohol infused dance is actually not the answer whatsoever. I think that that is an escapist sort of band-aid kind of hedonistic way to approach what's happening right now. So I just feel like that's not an intentional way to heal. I really believe that dance as a healing modality, as a way to gather humans together to intentionally come together to spread joy and peace to one another, to compose and alchemize what they're experiencing in their own lives. It is actually somatic healing. This is an incredibly supportive way to move through suffering. And so I see it as a much better antidote to suffering in this moment than medicating or isolating or saying no to dance experiences, because what we create with the Peace Tour and our Purple Tour, for example, we're on a Peace Tour right now, a 17-city Peace Tour around the nation to spread peace and joy. Everyone's dressed in white. We released white doves at our launch event. We've had thousands of people dancing for peace across the nation, and that coherence is being felt right now. And I really, really believe in dance as a technology that we're not tapping into the way it deserves to be tapped into. It's just, in the modern world, it's sort of codependent to drugs and alcohol or late night partying, after hours or drunken wedding nights, rather than the sort of very, very healing sacred space. And that's what we are doing on the Peace Tour at Daybreaker, and also in the Purple Tour this fall during the elections, to bring blue and red together to bring more harmony during a very divisive election cycle.
And that's exactly what you're doing in your book, Belong. That's what's happening through all of your projects. You've infused your heart, you've infused your spirit, and you've infused your effervescent, inclusive, unconditional love for all beings into your work. And Radha, these are the conversations that we're missing. And if you're tuned in, we encourage you to go and find a way to spread joy, to be joy, and to honor the feelings that are coming up and find meaningful relationships, find meaningful people in your life, and to volunteer, to give back, to serve. Allow yourself to find solace in knowing you're not alone, because we're all in this together. And Radha, you're a great example of that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for being a powerful woman in this world that needs more and more upliftment of the feminine and the divine feminine. I bow, I salute, and I honor you. And thank you so much for joining the podcast and being the very first guest on Everlutionary. Very first guest. You are that. Tatwa Masi.
I'm honored, Hawah, and it's been an honor to weave together in DC with yoga and at Burning Man. And your magic is also so, so felt. And I'm really excited to see where this podcast goes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. And we'll bring you back again for a future episode.
Would love that.
Awesome. As the gentle melodies that have accompanied our conversation with Radha Agrawal linger in the air, we are left to ponder the intricate dance of community, connection, and belonging. Today, Radha has illustrated that the rhythm of community is not just found in the music of Daybreaker, but in every step we take towards each other in our daily lives. She's invited us to join a global movement, not only of joyful dance, but of meaningful connections that span cities, cultures, continents, and every fabric of society. As we bid farewell to Radha, let's embrace the compass of belonging she has shared. Belonging as a keystone to our species' survival and the solution to global conflict and violence. Let this compass guide us in our interactions, urging us to build bridges where there are none and to find and nurture meaningful relationships. Thank you, Radha, for weaving your insights into the tapestry of our discussion. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this journey of discovery in Everlutionary, restoring balance and healing the world. I hope this episode leaves you inspired to cultivate your own communities of joy and belonging. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the narratives and knowledge that shape our collective evolution. Until then, let's remember, community isn't just about being seen, it's about each of us being valued, and each of us taking the time to listen. Let's go. Peace. Everlutionary, restoring balance and healing the natural world, is brought to you by me, Hawah Kasat. If you would like to find out more about me and my story, head to hawah.us. That's HAWAH.US. And then make sure to search for me in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening. Stay in touch. Peace.